My mom gave me up for adoption after my dad died and she had an affair with my uncle. Years later, she found me online, pretending to reconnect with my mom. She recently got in touch with me at 17 years old. I hadn't spoken to my biological mother, Julia, for 10 years. When I was 7, she placed me for adoption. I was lucky to find a family that would adopt me. I'll call my adoptive parents mom and dad for simplicity. At 20, Julia gave birth to me with my biological father. I was the reason she had to leave college. They got married shortly after my biological father's graduation. He was diagnosed with leukemia when I was about 3. He died not long after. It's been 7 years since my mom gave me away and I moved in with my new family. Just one day after my dad died, I suppose the process of relinquishing custody had already begun long before. 10 years have gone by since then, but I can still recall everything as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was really angry and perplexed by what was happening. Many people assured me that I would be okay, that my dad was in a better place, and so on. But all I wanted was to check on him. Even though he had been quite ill, he was always available when I wanted to visit him. After my dad died, I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. My new family arrived the day after he passed away. I was still trying to process everything. My mom said these people would look after me for a few days, but it ended up being weeks, months, and years. I kept waiting for her to get in touch. At first, I cried a lot because I felt like my mom and my family had left me. My biological grandparents visited me a few weeks after my parents took me in, and they've stayed in contact with me. They'd been avoiding my questions for a while, but I was 14 by then and knew I was adopted. I just wanted to know what happened with my birth mother. I remember getting along with my birth parents when I was younger, so I was just curious. I eventually learned the truth from my parents and grandparents. My mother was distraught to learn that my biological father had leukemia. She started an affair with my uncle instead, supporting him, even though that was terrible in and of itself. No one was aware of it until 6 months before my dad passed away. At that point, my uncle's health had begun to deteriorate significantly. Julia knew she wanted to be with him as soon as my father was gone, so they decided there was no use in continuing to hide their romance. My uncle and Julia discussed it with their parents, despite their clear revulsion at what was happening. My grandparents remained silent about it out of concern for my ailing father. They didn't want my father, who was already dealing with a lot, too. I was too young to understand any of this. My uncle and Julia also said they didn't want to raise me and were thinking of placing me for adoption around the same time they told my grandparents about the affair. Despite all the commotion, Julia was clear about what she wanted. She apparently said she didn't even want to be a mother and that she had been too young when she gave birth to me. Her parents urged her to take me and marry my father, which made her feel ready at the time. Her life would have been quite different otherwise. She probably wouldn't have done either of those things if her parents hadn't put pressure on her. She didn't want me either, and she was going to place me for adoption since that would mean my father would no longer be involved. They waited until my father died since it was clear that they could not send me away while he was still living. They then gave my parents permission to finally take me in. My adoptive parents were just as surprised as I was. They were only interested in adopting a kid to complete their family because they had been having trouble becoming pregnant again after their first. My mom was pregnant, which was too risky for her. My parents said they hadn't heard from any adoption agencies, but I know they probably wanted to adopt a younger child. My mom was formerly acquainted with Julia, so it was actually one of her cousins who informed her of my predicament. They realized they had to get me out as soon as they learned about me. They spoke to my mom face to face without the involvement of any agency and didn't care about my age. Even my mom was having trouble finding a willing adopter for a year. My adoptive parents had already been chosen by the agency 4 months before my dad died. They had a conversation with Julia and everything was settled a few weeks before he passed away. Even my parents thought I would be staying with Julia for a few days after my father died, but she sent me out the very next day. I was happy that Julia had chosen to place me with my adoptive parents. I was lucky to be adopted because people usually choose younger children. I found amazing parents and a truly amazing family. I couldn't be happier because I adore my parents and older brother. I also have 4 sets of grandparents, so you can imagine how pampered I've been. After my dad died, no one stayed in contact with my uncle or Julia. My grandparents had planned my funeral, but they weren't even present. I was there because I was already going through a really tough time. It would be best for me to get used to my new life. They believed I would feel unwelcome or at least a little sad after learning the truth about why I had been placed for adoption and why Julia had left me. However, I was relieved that I had met parents who genuinely wanted me and had avoided living with my biological mother. Now that I'm 17 and will be attending college in a few months, I seldom ever think about Julia, my uncle, or their activities. However, Julia contacted me on Instagram to ask if I would be open to meeting with her and making amends, so I have been thinking about them. I haven't been online much over the past few days because I have a public account, but I didn't understand why she was contacting me after all these years. I decided to find out why she suddenly wanted to patch things up with me before I consented to anything. She wrote a long, sincere message in which she expressed regret for letting go of me and choosing to focus on her life with my uncle rather than her role. As a mother, she wanted me to know that she wasn't totally wrong, even though she said it wasn't her place to make me return as her daughter. She said her only mistake was taking on too much at an early age before she knew what she was doing. She was under a lot of pressure, which made her make a lot of bad choices, even though my family might say otherwise. My mom said she never regretted having me. She wanted to make amends because she wasn't prepared to become a mother. I was interested, so I thought about it and decided to go ahead and meet her. I didn't tell my parents or grandparents because I didn't think it was necessary. It wasn't until I met her that I realized she needed my help. She wasn't just trying to patch things up. I should have recognized it. I tried to find the positive in everyone, including Julia. She seemed so friendly and pleasant when we met for lunch 2 days ago. She told me her parents had forced her to take care of me, marry my father, and leave college. She wasn't prepared for any of it, but she felt pressured by her parents to conform. She also told me about her husband's condition. Was the final straw for her to have an affair after she started to feel smothered in her marriage. She said that because she thought my uncle was the love of her life, she didn't regret having the affair. She's been happily married to him for the past 8 years and was happy to find him. She broke down in tears as she spoke about my uncle, telling me that part of the reason she had come to me was because their marriage was now in peril. She needed my help to make amends with both her parents and my father's parents. They cut her off for the past 10 years and didn't want anything to do with her or my uncle. Julia and my uncle had been okay with this distance, but lately my uncle had begun to argue with her because he wanted to make up with his parents after everything that had transpired. He was aware that they'd never accept him back, for some reason. He was blaming Julia, thinking that things wouldn't have turned out so badly if she had waited a little longer and not given up on me so quickly. Her only option was to have me speak with my grandparents and persuade them to make amends with her and my uncle. Then perhaps she could prevent her marriage from disintegrating. She clarified that she and my uncle had been a lot of arguments over the last few weeks. She said this was the only solution she could think of. To be honest, I regret going to meet that woman more than anything else in my life. She said she was obviously not present to truly apologize, provide an explanation, or simply make apologies. She was only there because she believed I could help her with her marital problems. I doubt I would want to assist her even if I could, given how self-centered she has been. She was pretty centered, but she doesn't deserve my assistance. I listened to her and told her that I couldn't be moved by her crocodile tears. As I was about to go, she added that I would have had a greater understanding of her predicament if I had been in her shoes. She said she did her best to be a good mother to me, but she felt compelled to become a mother before she was ready. I was no different from the others. If I was unable to recognize that because I had been brainwashed by my family, I was pretty irritated by that even though she had only been my mother for 6 or 7 years. She had all the support in the world. I was certain that my grandparents had not advised her to leave college, it was her own decision. My mother had decided to have me. They had often informed me that they had simply told her to have me. I told her to see where it went without pushing. She took their advice as coercion. If I had to choose who I would trust, I would choose my grandparents. I advised her to find another place to sell her products. I didn't believe she should leave. I also informed her that I didn't trust a word she said. She made her apology seem insincere by trying to persuade me to restore her relationship without attempting to make amends. I told her that since we weren't dating, I wasn't required to help her in any way. I may have been born to her, but my mother didn't raise me. I left the restaurant and returned home. I discovered she had texted me after I came home. She was crying in the voice note. The background sounds indicated that. I felt a little bad about that because it takes a lot of heartbreak to cry that much in public. She was crying and claiming that it was terrible of me to say that we had no relationship in the voicemail. She said that I was her biological mother and that she would always be my biological mother despite everything. Mom still thought of me as her daughter, however. I'm not sure what to say to her. I simply no longer think of her as my mother, and I don't want to feel guilty about it. For the last 10 years, she has not been my mother. She was crying on the phone, and that makes me feel messy and conflicted. However, I still can't bring myself to block her. She is a person who shared a bond with me, even though I don't consider her to be my mother. Edit: I haven't told my family about meeting Julia. I thought it was obvious in my post, but I didn't notify them in advance. I don't think they would support my choice, but I know I owe it to them. I intend to make this choice on my own for the time being, but I know I owe it to them. I will tell them they all despise her and with good reason. I know that if I informed them, they wouldn't. I'm sure that if I hadn't gone to see her, I'd still be stuck in this loop. I wanted to speak with her one last time and I knew she'd apologize. I guess I wasn't thinking clearly since her reaching out evoked a lot of conflicting feelings. In any case, I met her and it's over now. If I could go back in time, I'd do things differently. I wouldn't change a thing. I got the closure I needed. I have no regrets. Sometimes you have to put everyone else aside and follow your instincts, even if they're wrong. It's an asterisk, your asterisk error, at least the first update at last. I told my family I'd met Julia. They were unhappy about it, as you'd expect. She started sending me texts and calls requesting that I talk to her again and give her a chance to explain herself. I blocked her a few days ago after we met last week. I didn't know what she'd say, but I didn't want to find out more from her. I got what I needed from our one encounter. She only needed my help. She didn't really want to talk or make things right after our fight at the restaurant. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason she got in touch with me. I knew it was time to tell my family about our encounter, and I didn't want to talk to her again. So I sat down with my parents and all of my grandparents today and gave them an explanation of everything. My parents were pretty mad that I had left without telling them who I was meeting and that I hadn't talked to them about it. My grandparents were the ones who were angry with me, though. I listened to my parents' frequent reprimands because I deserved them. I should have talked to them first. They were most concerned that, given my mother's tendency to manipulate people, she might have tried to brainwash me or make them look bad when she was done. I told them that I had just met. I felt like I needed to explain my reasoning to her to get closure. I didn't expect everyone to understand it right away, but I just expressed regret for doing it behind their backs. It seemed like everyone was ready to move on when I vowed never to be untruthful with them again. After that, we talked about Julia's motivation for contacting us and her remarks regarding my uncle's desire to make amends with his parents. We all agreed that the matter was more complicated than she was making it out to be. We all agreed that the situation was more complicated than she was making it out to be. They were probably in a tough spot and could use some help if she was trying to get me to help her reconnect with the family. Julia had been really upset and said her marriage was in trouble. My uncle was upset with her, and my grandparents thought she was probably. Ultimately, we decided not to get involved because it wasn't our place to do so, regardless of the truth. The day Julia and my uncle announced their relationship while my father was still unwell, my grandparents made it clear that they no longer regarded them as family. Julia gave me away without even talking to them or giving me an explanation, which was the last straw. They were just fortunate that my adoptive parents let my biological parents stay in my life, but Julia is now blocked by me. I will never speak to her again, no matter what. She's been trying to get in touch with me, messaging me about how her life and marriage are failing and how much she needs me. I feel bad for not paying attention to her, but really, what does she expect me to do? I couldn't persuade her. Laws or my grandparents. To get back together even if I wanted to if she keeps annoying me. I heard my grandparents discussing possible reasons for my uncle's desire to make amends. They said it might be money problems. We have no idea what they've been up to because no one in the family has been in contact with them. We know they still reside in the same city, but that's all. In the past, Julia was a stay-at-home mom. At the moment, it's unclear whether my grandparents are correct in their assumption that Julia and my uncle are attempting to reconcile due to financial difficulties. If this is the case, it would explain why they've been in contact with her home mother, but who knows now, it just serves to highlight how bad their actions are if my grandparents are right and Julia and my uncle are trying to get back together because of financial difficulties. They're trying to make contact with a daughter they left behind 10 years ago in order to make amends with their parents in exchange for money that is among the lowest of the low. I hope they get what they deserve if there's any truth to this. Second update: Julia contacted me today. She's been trying to contact me for about 10 days. I blocked her after a week of no communication. She somehow found my school's address. I guess this is why we shouldn't post our private information on open sites. That's the hard lesson I learned. She showed up out of nowhere today as I was walking home from school. It was about a block from the school, which is where I usually walk because I live nearby. She started shouting for me to get into her car as soon as it pulled up. I told her I wouldn't let her in. I also told her that if she tried to cause trouble, I'd yell in the middle of the road, and she'd be dealt with. She said she only wanted to communicate and wasn't there to argue or upset me. She said she only wanted to make amends with me and didn't care if I didn't help. She wanted to make amends with her parents. She said that our last encounter had gone badly and that she wanted to make amends. I could hear desperation in her voice, but I was irritated, not sorry. I told her I didn't want anything to do with her and that she should leave me alone. She was really good at acting regretfully, but I'm actually proud of myself for not falling for her act the first time. She freaked out as soon as I instructed her to go. She began to curse at me, claiming that although she said she'd make sure to ruin my life if I kept treating her this way. She even told me to guard my back. I thought it was funny. How would she respond? She cursed at me as I kept walking, then she drove away, yelling at me as she went. I told my folks about that when I got home. We all met up to decide what to do next. We were able to get a restraining order since she had threatened me. That was the best course of action we all agreed on. Update 3: My parents requested a restraining order against Julia a few days ago. My uncle finally contacted his folks after she was served. It had to do with money, as we suspected. They have been operating a confectionery for a few years, but it hasn't been doing well. It turns out they realized that contacting them personally would not help their financial situation. They created this entire act for that reason. Sadly for them, Julia blew it. After losing patience, now I would be the happiest person alive if they got divorced over this. As their only son, my uncle is attempting to appease his parents by saying he said he had nothing to do with Julia's actions and is entitled to financial support. Julia, however, has adopted a hostile stance. She has been disparaging us online without considering the repercussions. All that does is strengthen our argument. She is obviously unstable, therefore we are certain that we will obtain the restraining order. She made it plain the other day that she doesn't want anything to do with me, so I'm not really sure why she's resisting it since I'm heading off to college in the autumn. It doesn't really matter, she's struggling financially, so I doubt she'll be there. I'm not worried because my parents and family will always be there for me. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.